I'd love to jump right in. The world is so stressful right now. So many people are struggling with stress in their lives and just falling apart emotionally and mentally. I'd love to hear from each of you what your advice is to people living in this stressful world that we're living in.
The core of the work that we've done together, Alice and myself, is that is an idea that doesn't promise that the stressors will stop. As a matter of fact, as you probably would agree, the world is becoming more and more and more stressful. Even at the macro level, it's becoming stressful. And so I think the trick is post awareness. You need a conviction within you that your stress is not just the result of the events happening in your life. It really is about the way you deal with them. And the slogan of Unstressable is that it's not the events of your life that stress you, it's the way you deal with them that does. You can actually develop the skills and the abilities to be able to respond to those stressors in ways that would actually make you unstressable, or at least less stressable when those events show up. Awareness is the first one, and an acknowledgement from within you that you are actually going through stressful times, that they are affecting you in a stressful way, and an acknowledgement within you that this is not entirely because of the world outside you. It is because of some of the responses you have from within you. And then finally, a commitment that you can change that. And if you take the actions and put in place the systems and processes, it's impossible to promise anyone to be unstressable, but definitely you can be a lot less stressable as life becomes stressful.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, today, I think if you're not realizing that the world is stressful, or if you're not stressed, then you haven't been aware of what's going on around you. And at the moment, everyone is just, I mean, it's the most stressed time we've ever seen. I mean, 70 to 90% of all doctors' visits, non-emergency in the US, are somehow related to stress, which is just crazy, a crazy stat. And so I always think about, okay, well, the reality is this world isn't changing anytime soon. What we can do in the outside world in terms of limiting, the stuff that's out of our control is really we're in a place where a lot of things will keep happening that we have no control over. So our sort of ethos on that sense is that you can always obviously control what's going on within you. And when you can learn to choose your response, no matter what's going on around you, that's when you can become unstressable, when you can actually learn how to manage your mind, your heart, your body, and your soul. These different languages that we talk about, which we'll talk about sure and more, I'm sure. Actually understanding that those different parts of you and how you get stressed and how you can change it is just such a huge part of this is awareness. And so often, so many of us go through life not even realizing how stressed our system is. So the starting point for me is always just understanding that you're going to be stressed if you're in the modern world, whether you want to be or not, in terms of like your system being set off and putting into fight and flight just from being stuck in traffic, or the aggressive WhatsApp email, aggressive emails we get from many things and WhatsApp notifications. Whether the world was stressful itself or not, in terms of the bigger things, the smaller things are still stressing our system. So it's really becoming aware of that piece, first of all, and understanding that you actually have a responsibility to tell your system to calm down and de-stress, whether you think you're stressed or not. Then you'll be in a much better place, because it's kind of looking at how, yeah, work backwards and just think, okay, maybe my system's stressed, even if I don't feel it. So I should do something about that, because your system will be, from being in the modern world. And there's obviously so many stress hacks you can do to go through all that. But it's that starting piece for me is always awareness, being aware of the fact that you are stressed, where your stress is coming from, and then how you can then go about changing that.
And I know the idea of your book, as you kind of alluded to, is that stress isn't about like what happens to you. It's how you handle it that counts, right? And that's the idea of the adversity advantage, is like adversity is going to come. That's not what counts. What counts is like, what are you doing in response to that? So I'd love to get each of your thoughts on what can people do. Like if each of you were going through a stressful situation right now, where you were emotionally charged, you're in fight or flight, you're feeling it physically, what are some things that you would do to make sure that the stress doesn't become worse?
Yeah, so I mean, I always look at body first. If you're going through a really stressful, traumatic time, in terms of you think you're in fight or flight and you're in a deep sense of adversity, a lot of the time we don't realize that our body's in hypervigilance when we're going through a state of stress like that. And then the body will keep the mind stressed and the mind will keep the body stressed. And we go in this kind of loop. So to break the circuit for people, it's really good to tell your body that it's safe again if you're going through a time of deep, stress and trauma. And so doing things like, you call it like balansana, if you Google legs up a wall pose, for example, lying flat on your back with your legs up a wall, breathing deeply, that automatically puts your body into parasympathetic state, into that rest and digest. And, doing things like, making sure you're doing low inflammatory exercise. So walking and things like Pilates and restorative yoga, because when you are going through that really tough time and your body's in hypervigilance, you'll know your body's in hypervigilance, by the way, people listening. If you are walking down the street and you hear, for example, a rustle of a leaf or something and you jump and you're really alert to sounds, you'll know that your body's really wired, your nervous system is. So yeah, looking at how you can, move it into that relaxed state with the body piece. And then I'm always looking at emotional releasing, because we spend so much time storing our unprocessed emotions that it actually turns into physical stress in the body, or just not even processing the emotions that we need to when we're going through a tough time. And so if you think, okay, well, I don't even know how to tap into that, I'm in sort of fight or flight, running away from, what's going on in my life, just constantly on the go. Just even sitting down, with a pen and paper and a journal out and asking myself, okay, how do I feel today? And answering that question. And then how do I want to feel? And starting to actually begin the processing start of your emotions. There's something we look at in our work with emotional stress, which I call the curiosity structure, which is, looking at how you can become more curious with your emotions. Just starting with, okay, sitting down, taking a deep breath. You've had a tough day with whatever you're going through. Asking yourself, which emotion do I feel? Where do I feel this in my body? Why might I be feeling this emotion, and what can I do about it? So it's like which, where, why, and what, and starting to bring some like logic to that emotional piece, because I know some people really struggle at the beginning with like tapping into emotions. So if you can, bridge it with those questions first, which, where, why, and what, and breathe into that and just ask yourself, okay, why am I feeling this way? And then what can I actually start to do about that as well? Because our emotions and, with the emotional language with us, we only ever want, have kind curiosity with it. Our emotion just wants our attention. And so, yeah, the quicker we can sort of run towards those feelings when we're going through a time of like true stress and trauma, the quicker they'll actually start to, dissipate and become more mellow.
I can second that again very strongly. I had such a stressful week last week. It was incredible. I had a business deal that, where I was in a corner, and the landlord that we needed to rent from or renew the lease with was really abusing their power, and it was very, very stressful. And sadly, my mom's not doing well for the last 3 months now, and I had some difficult news last week. Luckily, she's a bit better now, but still, it was very, very difficult. And a lot of little things. I lost my wallet with all of my official documents in it, and little things, but they add up. Even it's almost like the universe is trying to test if I'm unstressable or not. And I have to say, the body it speaks first. I texted Alice and I said, Alice, I really feel a lot of aches and pains. And when your body is tense, and I was traveling. I did 14 takeoffs and landings in the last 6 days. And Alice said, start with your physical stress. And it's actually really interesting, because if you really understand how stress works, stress is a biological response. It is first and foremost, it's a machinery, a system within our biology that basically is all about engaging your sympathetic nervous system. It's a survival mechanism for fight or flight, really. And in a very interesting way, in the modern world, most of the threats and stressors we deal with, will not end if you run away from them, or if you pounce on them like a tiger. That's not going to end them. And so that residual stress within our bodies really works very differently when you force, or when you sort of fool your body into a parasympathetic nervous system state, and just by really doing the things that you would do when you're in a parasympathetic nervous system state. So, eat healthier. I cut sugar out of my diet cold turkey, like not a single ounce of sugar for the last 8 days or so. And I started to rest and relax a little more, be more precious about my meditation practices and so on. Just that gives you the space, the breather, to actually find yourself a little bit of calm so that you can address the situation. My normal approach, though, is more in the mental stress space. As Alice mentioned briefly at the beginning, we think there are 4 modalities of what makes us human, and each of them gets stressed differently: mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so in the mental stress space, it's your thoughts that stress you. It's the fact that the fact that the landlord is unjust, or uneasy, if you want, or being difficult to deal with, is not what is stressing me. It's the thoughts within my mind of what's going to happen to the business, and how much money will we lose, and what will happen to the team, and this and that and the other. This is what's stressing. And now go back to the basics of what stress is. Stress is basically telling you there is a challenge ahead of you that needs to be addressed. Okay. And if you take that and apply it to your thoughts, I go through what I call the 3 pillars of sanity. I think this is my favorite go-to always, where basically I would define not the event that is stressing me, but the thought that is stressing me. Then I ask 3 questions. Okay. So remember, you have an argument with your partner. That's the event. Okay. The thought that's stressing you is he or she doesn't love me anymore, or we're going to break up. Okay. You find that thought, and I ask 3 questions. Question number 1 is it true? Right? Because most of the time it isn't. Most of the time it's a mix of the event and a lot of our assumptions and a lot of our history and a lot of our trauma and baggages and so on. If it's not true, I drop it. If it is true, I ask question number 2, which is, what can I do to fix it? This is really what stress is all about. What can I do to fix it? Like this situation with the landlord, what can I do to fix it? If there is something you can do to fix it, do it right away. Okay. And question number 3, when sometimes there are things you can't fix, is, can I accept it and do something to make my life better despite its presence? Right. And I applied those immediately. Like, the pressure would actually lead us to lose the business, really. So what can I do to fix it? I had a very, strict and straightforward conversation with the landlord, right? And I had another, what if that conversation doesn't fix it? I also had another conversation with my team saying, look for other locations, calculate how much we need to move, and so on and so forth. And once you do that, the situation will be more likely to be fixed. And by the way, you will immediately lose the feeling of stress because you've done what you can, which is the original purpose why stress is trying to keep you alive.
And we all know that person that is just constantly stressed out. There's always something going on. Like you see them, their name come up on the phone. You're like, oh my gosh, like what are they about to tell me, right? And we've all been there, so it's not to shame anybody. But I say this because I think a lot of that comes down to some of these things that we can control in response to the stress, and we create a new normal about how we respond to stress and create more stress in our lives. Do you think, given how addictive adrenaline can be, like the adrenaline rush and cortisol, do you think that people can actually become addicted to being stressed out?
Yeah, I mean, let me take this one first, Alice. I think I'm very much into the side of life. So first of all, we wear stress as a badge of honor, right? So Alice wrote that in the very early chapters of the book, and I found that to be very true. It's not that we're just addicted to it, okay? We're actually proud of it, because if I'm stressed, that means I'm busy, and if I'm busy, that means I'm important. It's an ego thing, right? And we also sometimes just accept stress as the tax that you have to pay to succeed, which, by the way, is not true at all. That grumpy man with the striped suit saying, oh, people will perform their best when they are stressed. No, that's not true at all. People will perform their best when they're in flow, or in a very good teamwork, or when they're creative and fully committed, and so on and so forth. Stress just squeezes 5% more from the execution of things. It's not actually what leads you to be in places that create an iPhone. Once you've had the idea of a new device that can revolutionize the world, you can then work a little harder with stress and deliver it a month early, or a month early. The interesting side of this is that when you think of that call it, I don't think it's called addiction, but call it the acceptance of stress as a way of life. Uh, you realize that there are two sides to it. Maybe one side I'll cover and ask Alice to cover the other. There is the side of skills. In the model that we call the 3 Ls, which is the backbone of Unstressable, limit, learn, and listen. Learn, that bit in the middle, that second L, is actually all about skills and resources that you build. I mean, think about it, huh? Every single one of us, what freaks you out at 20, you manage to resolve easily if it shows up when you're 30. You do it with total ease when you're 40. And in my 50s now, I just laugh about it, right? Things that freaked me out when I was 20, I laugh about them at my 50. Not because they're easier, but because I'm more capable. I've been trained to see the truth stressors of life, right? So that learning bit, that idea of acquiring skills, we've actually in Unstressable sort of looked at it algorithmically and in a comparison to the physics of objects, right? If you take an object and you stress the object is not just stressed because of the force applied to it. In physics, it's the force divided by the square area of the cross section of the object, right? The more square area the object has to carry the force, the less stressed it feels, right? And in school they used to tell us that's why the camel doesn't sink in the desert, because the hoofs are very big, so the couple of tons of weight are distributed across a very big square area. Similarly for humans, the idea is to understand that, and you have evidence for it because things become easier the more exposed to them you become, is to understand that every stress cycle you go through is a call for you to learn a skill that allows you to deal with it better the next time. So it's not the people that are constantly freaking out are simply people who refuse to believe that there is an element of responsibility and accountability on their side to learn a skill that allows them to deal with that issue going forward. Of course, the other side of this is that for many of us, we let too many things into our life. So Alice, maybe I ask you to cover the limit side and other points if you want.
Yeah, I think I agree totally. And I also think there is, in terms of like that addiction side, we become sort of familiarized with feeling stressed and anxious. And a lot of people actually remember more what it's like to be constantly stressed, whether that's their body memory or even just their general state, than they do to feel calm and happy and at ease. And actually, when we were giving a talk the other day, I think I asked people, I was like, when was the last time you felt like truly calm? And I was like, I bet it was the end of a holiday. And most people were like, yep, at the end of a holiday, because that's the only time they actually know they can feel completely calm and normal. And that's not the way we should be living at all. But it is, that familiar comfort. So it's a semi-addiction, I think, for sure, because it's what your body knows and it's what yourself really feels safer being in stress, because that's your normal, as strange as that sounds. So yeah, when we looked at that other side, it's like limit, learn, and listen. It's actually, before, obviously, like Mo said, you learn the skills to actually manage this, and then we can listen to those 4 parts of ourselves when they speak. The first part is limiting. So limiting the needless stress in our lives, because we let in a lot of unnecessary stress without realizing and just think it's normal because of the modern world that we live in. But things like I said, earlier, our stress response goes off today from what used to be a tiger coming out of the bushes will now go off in the same way for, getting stuck in traffic, or an upsetting email, or multiple WhatsApp notifications, or an aggressive factory setting alarm that wakes you up and jolts you out of bed in the morning. And so all these different things are very much the one part that we totally have control of in terms of the outside stress. So, looking at limiting in terms of, we have micro and macro stresses in our life. And we have a model where we look at where our stress comes from, called a ton of stress. So trauma is the macro external T, obsessions is the macro internal, and then the micro side are the really things that you can limit. So noise, which is micro internal, and nuisances, which is micro external. Those things, particularly nuisances in this sense, we have a huge capacity to limit those. So to limit the needless stress. So it's like when people can actually think, okay, I don't need to have my phone next to me for 24 hours a day. And the reality is if I come back in the evening and I put my phone in a phone graveyard, out of sight, out of mind, in a drawer, just for 1 hour in the evening, and whether that's time spent with myself and doing, active relaxation, or whether that's time actually connecting with your loved ones and those around you and being fully present, the effect that has on our system is huge. Because the average person, I think studies showed recently, the average person touches their phone over 2,500 times a day, which is just insane. Yeah, exactly. It is. And that's because it's there, it's next to us all the time. So we just think, oh, yeah, pick it up. And so, yeah, I mean, we can limit the needless stress in our life, changing your morning alarm to something soothing. For example, I have mine as a meditation song that gets louder. And that just change of actually not jolting yourself out of bed, limiting those tiny things has a huge effect on our system, because micro stress, those nuisances and noise, one thing never causes you harm. No one's going to have, a crisis over, one WhatsApp notification, but there's never one. We live in the modern world where we get, 55,000 a day, and we have multiple emails and multiple traffic jams and multiple meetings and all these different things. So what you can limit is so important. And then, like Mo said, you learn the skills to manage what you can't and to deal with stress better. And that third piece is then that listening to those four parts of yourself: the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and how those different parts speak in a different language. They get stressed in a different way. And when we realize, like we talked about earlier, when you needed to work with your physical stress first, or do you need to work with your mind? When you realize which one is actually asking for your attention, then it becomes a lot easier to manage, because you understand yourself better and you understand your own responses and what's actually going to make you feel less stressed.
I want to just also cover something very quickly on limit. So limit does not only, does not end with the smaller things. Huh? As a matter of fact, learning to limit the bigger things, anything sub-trauma, if you want, is a very important skill. So when you really think about it, some people will be listening to this and they have two kids that are very difficult to get out of bed in the morning and send to school, and it's unavoidable. You can't limit it, huh? But you can limit it. You can limit it by getting prepared a little earlier in the evening, so everything is in place. You can limit it by developing habits with them that they love going to bed at a certain time. You can limit it. Interestingly, as a father of two myself, and having gone through the phase where they were very demanding without enjoying it at all, I look back now and I say, could I have enjoyed that time? Could I have had the wake up time and breakfast, and a nice conversation, and a connection when we drive to school together? This could have made it easier. I mean, it applies to everything. It applies to, if your job is annoying, you can change it and limit it, but of course not overnight. You can start applying and 8 months later it goes out of your life. But can you look at the things that you enjoy in it? Make sure you have more of them. If you have a couple of friends at work, make sure that you spend time together over lunch, and so on and so forth. It doesn't really take it away. Limiting is not to take it away, but limiting it could also be to either reduce its intensity, reduce its frequency, or enjoy the parts that are enjoyable within it.
And staying on this theme of reducing stress and like the mind body connection, Mo, you mentioned that you cut out sugar for the last 8 days, and we know that like diet and lifestyle can play a big role in stress. Alice, you talked about the phone and technology and having a better relationship with that. And when it comes to avoidable stress, I feel like from a habit perspective, people can do things that create more stress in their life, whether it's people they spend time with, whether it's how they eat, how they move their body. So I'd love for each of you to talk about like what are some things that people should really pay attention to from like a habit perspective on a daily or weekly basis that are adding stress to their life that they might not be aware of.
I can to say a very quick thing, and I think Alice is much more capable of covering this than me. I think it differs from person to person. And I think the number one skill, which is something I did yesterday, by the way, on my flight, is to take a stress inventory. Is to look back at your last week or two and write down what actually stressed you, right? And rank them in order. Certain things that stress me very much might not stress Alice at all. And so accordingly, it is an individual thing to actually create that awareness between you and yourself and say, these are things that are stressing me. I'm going to remove those from my life or reduce them somehow. But the list is endless. Alice, you can cover as many of it as you'd like.
Yeah, no, I completely agree because we're all complete. We have different stress thresholds, like Mo said. So, like, what stresses one out doesn't stress another out. But being aware of these tiny little changes you can make have a huge effect. So, a starting point for people is okay, well, one thing I always do is put my phone on airplane mode at a certain time in the evening. So that last hour or hour and a half is not spent on technology whatsoever. And if you can have it out of your bedroom, not as your alarm, that's even better. If you're happy to have, either a separate phone that's not connected to anything or just an old school alarm, although that's quite aggressive, I find the alarm sounds. That's another tip I give. But it's, putting that away, making sure you don't then look at that, having that disconnected time. In the morning, like changing your alarm sound to something soothing. I know it sounds really strange and small, but I was saying the other day to Mo, I had a new phone and I forgot that I hadn't had my alarm song that I love putting on, my meditative, soothing song that gets louder and louder and wakes me up. And I'm a deep sleeper, so I understand people like, oh, maybe my alarm won't wake me up, but it's actually putting something on soothing that then actually just brings you awake in a nice, calm way. And when I had the factory setting on from having a new phone by accident, the difference in how I woke up, I felt this sudden, shock of cortisol was just crazy actually. So it's like putting a soothing alarm on, actually then looking at things like, okay, how do you have that first 5 to 15, half an hour, minutes of your morning? A lot of people say, okay, my kids wake me up and I don't get that like time for myself in the morning to even think. And that is, true for a lot of people, but everyone will have that moment, whether it's, you've been woken up before, or you can take 5 to 10 minutes after to firstly just put something on your bedside table that says like choose your thought. So to actively choose the first thought of your day instead of getting up and you're looking at your phone, going into reactive mode straight away, and choosing a positive thought. Because as we know, our brain has 81%, 80% negativity bias, always looking for threats just to keep us safe. And so, well, if we wake up immediately and go into reaction mode by grabbing our phones straight away without taking any time for ourselves and going into that response mode for the rest of the day, the automatic will be reaction for the rest of the day. You'll find it easier to get stressed. You'll find it easier to feel like you're rushed and busy. And your brain will find it easier to look for the negative as well. And so if you can, first of all, just take a morning ritual, but if you only have 5 minutes, just intentionally choose your first thought of the day and make it a positive intention. Like today, I choose to be calm and, calm and happy, whatever it is that works for you. And if you then have time to do a 15-minute morning routine, I'm a huge believer in, getting up, making your favorite morning drink. Another thing to add is to not have coffee in the first 45 minutes. I know that'll be upsetting for a lot of people, but your cortisol levels.
Upsetting to me for sure.
Yeah, that's very stressful, Alice. That's very stressful.
You have it, but the cortisol levels are your highest naturally when you wake up in the morning just to get you out of bed. So if you're a very stressed and anxious person, having coffee straight away on an empty stomach is only going to make you even more stressed. So to actually let those levels come down a bit and wait to have your coffee, start your morning with, whether it's hot water and lemon is amazing for your digestive system straight in the morning, and then have your coffee half an hour, 45 minutes later. Makes a huge difference in your system. But then just, doing a little morning ritual, like getting a piece of paper, a journal out, asking yourself, okay, how do I feel today? Like I said earlier, how do I want to feel today? And if your feeling is close to how you want to feel, then great, carry on to the next bit. But if it's not, and you think, okay, I'm not anywhere close to how I wanted to feel today, just ask yourself, what's one small micro intentional action I can take to help me to move me towards that feeling? So is it, okay, I'm going to call a friend on my way to work who makes me feel better because I'm feeling sad that day? Or is it, I'm actually going to listen to a positive podcast, go for a walk, do some exercise, whatever it is, just one tiny action. And then obviously meditation. I think that a lot of people shy away from meditating because we've been trained to kind of think that meditating is like you have to sit like Yoda on top of a mountain, not have a single thought come through your head, otherwise you haven't meditated, and so everyone pushes it away. I mean, Mo has an amazing form of meditation that he can tell you about, but meditating in general, whether it's for 5 minutes of breathing deeply and just extending your exhales. When you extend your exhale, you automatically put your body into parasympathetic state. So if you just sat for 5 minutes listening to something soothing and extending your exhale, that would have a huge effect on your system itself. And I always finish with, training by saying 5 by 5 gratitude. We all know like gratitude's amazing. You hear it banded around a lot for that reason of the negativity bias. But I look at 5, 5 and 5. So it's 5 things you're grateful for in the outside world, but 5 things you're also grateful for within your own self. Because when we're stressed and anxious, our self-worth and confidence can get damaged. And we really tend to be really hard on ourselves when we're stressed internally, that internal voice. So actually reminding yourself to be grateful for some of your good qualities, some of your good traits is a really important practice, again, to get your brain to start being kinder to yourself when you're stressed. And then in the evening, it's so interesting to me how we think that we can fall asleep by having our digital devices in our face and they have every single bit of information in the entire world in front of us. So it's obviously looking at how you can dim the lights from an early time. I dim my lights at 8 p.m. just to try and actually put, we've got huge light pollution from living in the modern world. And so our sensory side of our body is always stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. So actually just, dimming your lights. If they don't dim, then, lighting some candles, just having lower lighting from sort of 8 p.m. onwards is really, really helpful for your system to tell it, okay, it's actually time to go to bed. And then we looked at then, it's like not having sugar and alcohol for those that hour before bed. You're not going to have a good night's sleep if you're sort of pumping your body with all those things. There's so many little stress hacks, right? You can eat anti-inflammatory, like Mo was saying. We both eat an anti-inflammatory diet as much as possible because the reduction that has in your system, just not eating sugar, not, having processed carbohydrates if you're feeling really stressed, instead having sweet potato as your carb and vegetables, meat, fish, whatever it is. And actually just allowing your body to have that place where you're not flooding it with even more things to be stressed about is really, really helpful when you're going through a time of great stress. Mo, if you want to say about your meditation way, because I think that's a really good thing for people.
Again, I want to go back to reflection. I think it's really important. So for some reason, when we wrote Unstressable, there were lots of fours. Like the ton of stress is 4 places where stress comes into your life: trauma, obsessions, noise and nuisances. When we looked at your modalities, your body, your mind, your heart, your body, and your spirit. So you can be mentally, emotionally, physically, or spiritually stressed. And it's important to understand, where is stress coming from, what form is it coming from to you, and where is it affecting you. But I also find it quite interesting because you can look at the 4 things that matter really, which are life, love, body, and work, right? These are the things that really we engage in mostly on daily basis. Life is all about, what are you, how is your engagement with others? Are you lonely? Are you learning? Are you developing? Are you feeling good enough? Are you feeling that you're meeting your potential? Love is really a very big stressor. All relationships in general in our life is just quite significant when we're in love, or even in friendships, or sadly in the modern world now, when someone we don't even know or we don't remember where we met them comments on an Instagram post, right? And so all of those relations really, really matter. How is your health? Your body is not just the shape of it, but are you healthy? Are you eating healthy? Are you taking care of yourself? And what's happening at work, right? And so if you look at those different ones, you'll be able, in an organized way, literally tell yourself, what's happening with my life? Is my commute annoying? Is this happening? Is that happening? And so on. The typical little life things. The example for which that I was mentioning from last week is lost my wallet, lost my IDs, lost my credit cards. That makes life annoying. Just living becomes difficult, right? What's happening with my love life, right? What's my mom being and not feeling well is affecting my love life. It's taking away from someone that I believe, I believe I want to have in my life for a very, very long time, and so on. And you can go through that. Once again, that awareness sparks, a form of finding what it is that you need to work on. And I normally am very organized with this. I would write them all down, in those categories, and then I would organize them, rank them, and tell myself which one is upsetting me the most. And clearly, the one upsetting me the most or stressing me the most is my mom. So I managed to find a way to book a ticket, right after my book launch on the 9th, to go and spend, 4 days with her. I managed to call my brother and my sister-in-law and just talk to them about things we can do to make things easier for her, and so on. It is, if you really think about it, I think everything we're saying here is a question of reflection and then taking action, right? Really looking at it and saying, this is stressing me, rejecting the fact that stress is the default state of the modern world, and actually taking action to take it away.
So Mo, I'd love to get your thoughts on this because I know your background as an engineer, and like I think that like a lot of people can be just super logical in the way that they think. Like for me, I know like A plus B equals C, and so when I'm stressed, sometimes that's where my mind goes, and you can go down the rabbit hole, and then you're not able to connect to your body because your thoughts are just off to the races. And you're big on meditation now, and I know that you also practice a lot of time in silence and stuff. So how did you get to that place? Like how did you go from just being a super logical thinker to getting to this place of zen that you're at right now?
I think all of us have both sides. We just learn through the modern world to prioritize one over the other. I mean, I don't mean all of us have exactly 50-50. Nobody has 50-50. But, nobody is just on the emotional side and not on the logical side. Nobody's the opposite. We always have both of them. I feel that so when meditation specifically, I remember vividly the moment at which I changed my point of view. I was interviewing someone who's now become a very dear friend, one of the top Buddhist monks in the UK, called Galen Tupton. And Galen was on my podcast on Slo Mo, and he spoke about meditation like Alice was talking right now, saying that the reason why people refuse meditation is that it is very difficult when your mind hasn't been trained to meditate, to keep it calm. And so you think that you're failing when your mind wanders. He said, but mind wandering is the exact purpose of the exercise. And he basically said, it's like going to the gym. If you can if you can lift every weight in the gym with ease, that doesn't really count as an exercise anymore, right? A workout has to get you to the point where carrying the next weight is difficult. And so meditation is about noticing that your mind wandered and bringing it back, and that really encouraged me. I then did a lot of work on my third book, That Little Voice in Your Head, on understanding the fact that there is a very biological neuroscientific result of meditation, which through neuroplasticity develops different networks in your brain, right? And so the more you meditate, the easier it becomes to meditate. But that the idea is, when you're early in your meditation career, if you want, it's very difficult because you don't have those neural networks that enable you to find calm and peace. And so I did the opposite, really, which actually turned out eventually to be a very advanced level of meditation. Twice a week, I do a meditation that's called Meet Your Brain, right? I call it Meet Becky because I call my brain Becky because I believe my brain is a third party. It's not me. It's just a biological organ within me. And so meeting Becky is actually almost the opposite. Instead of the traditional meditation telling you to calm down and not have a single thought in your head, allegedly, the Meet Becky is the opposite. It's to let your mind wild, to allow yourself to think all of those trapped thoughts that you don't give enough attention to. And so they turn into incessant thoughts. They keep coming back over and over and over. And so I set my alarm to 25 minutes, not to finish in 25, but to not finish before 25. And I simply observe every thought that comes in my brain, right? And some real crap comes up. It's really quite fascinating, regardless of how often I do this. But the game here is this. If you listen and acknowledge your thoughts, your brain starts to slow down. It suddenly goes like, oh, he's listening. Oh, I might as well say something smart. Okay. And it starts to become more, your thoughts become more parsed out, not just a big cloud of white noise. You actually can recognize them. And all I do is I recognize a thought, I acknowledge it by saying it out loud or saying it in my head again, even sometimes writing it on a piece of paper, most of the time writing it on a piece of paper. And then I invite my brain to bring the next one by saying, what else? What else? What else? The only other rule of the meditation really is no thought is to be repeated. So when my brain brings the same thought twice, I say, oh, hold on, you said that again. You said that before, what else? Okay. And so with that, what ends up happening is your mind ends up in calm, not because you've tried to bring it down to calm, but because it ran out of things to say, which is an incredible. It turns out that this is a very advanced level of meditation, is to be aware of what you're aware of. Okay, but I actually think it's a very interesting for us thinkers. It's a very interesting approach to allowing yourself not to focus on your breathing, but to actually methodically focus on your thoughts. The only two tricks, as I said, is acknowledge them and dismiss them, and the other trick is no thought to be repeated. Having said that, because our audience are not like you or me or like anyone, everyone is very unique. I'd say that for some of us, when we're stressed, we tend to overthink. Okay. For some of us, when we're stressed, we turn to be very emotional. Okay. And for some of us, when we're stressed, we can have a mix of them and so on and so forth. It depends on the type of person that you are. The thing to know is that there is no right or wrong. There is absolutely no right and wrong. The only idea is, if you're emotional and you're trapping your thoughts, they will eventually, surface in incessant thinking. And if you're just hyper logical and you're just focused on thinking and analyzing, you're really trapping your emotions. And when you're trapping your emotions, like Alice always beautifully says, they don't go away. They are calling for your attention, and they'll become bigger and bigger and bigger. They'll be trapped in there, and they will show up one day when you're snapping someone's face, or so the game here is try to find that balance, because every thought triggers an emotion and every emotion triggers a thought.
We've spent a lot of the conversation talking about how we can reduce stress when stress happens, or reduce long-term stress based on how we handle it. Do you think there's a way that we can actually predict things that are going to stress us out, or predict when we're going to be stressed?
I do. In my personal life, I get to burn out in May and in November almost every year. I get really, really close because my current work style, or my current real work, if you want, other than being an author and a podcaster and so on, is I am a keynote speaker. So these are the seasons of travel, if you want. But the trick here is, every time that this happens, I learn to do better the next cycle. So we're in May now, and I definitely am not as stressed as last May, despite the weird week last week. You tend to plan it better. I think our world in general is about to be very stressed, and it's sad to say that, but the economics of the world, the geopolitical situation of the world, even the climate changes of the world, which are now starting to surface a little more. I live in Dubai, so we've had those two very strong storms that are like the first in 100 years, and so on. And so you can easily expect, as Alice said at the beginning, that the world is not going to provide less stress, and so the frequency at which we might be subjected to stressors is increasing, which basically means love yourself a little more. Truly and honestly, don't plan to always be at the edge of, like, if I add one more little straw to my load, I will be burnt out, or if I add one more stressful conversation, I'll snap, right? Try to buffer yourself a little bit. Try to care for yourself a little more before life throws stressors at you. Don't stress yourself. Let life do it. I think life will be good at it.
Funny thing is that we have, like Mo said, it's really important to understand what makes you stressed and predict that you will be more stressed then. We also have collective stress. We have times in the year, in our book we wrote about this. It's called like cyclical collective stress, of when we know it will actually be stressful for you. It's like holiday season, for example. In the West, like leading up to Christmas is statistically a very stressful time, because we overdo it with the amount of holiday parties you have to go to, whether that's with work or with family. You have family around you who you might not spend a lot of time with in the year, who you might not actually want to be in the room with half the time, and have these kind of, intense sort of disagreements sometimes, and all these different things. And it's also, looking at how those kind of times preempting what we call, cyclical stress, of times that, okay, if that time of the year, whether it's like the lead up to exam period with your kids, and you know that they're stressed at that time because they're doing exams, and you're stressed because you're having to run around and take them to different things and make sure that they're doing their homework and lead up to Christmas. Okay, well, how do you actually then just prepare yourself mentally to think, okay, well, if I know that time is going to be stressful, which we do, what can I do to sort of increase my resources and resilience before that time comes? So that, say you have your threshold of your baseline is happiness. If you're below that baseline before, from being overly stressed, of really running yourself ragged and not doing those tiny little things we talked about before, to support your system, you'll find it really hard to get above the baseline to happiness, but let alone you'll probably go below it again, because you'll feel even more depleted because you're coming from a place of depletion. So I think it's really important to, create a sort of internal buffer for yourself and your own resources when time is coming up that is actually going to be stressful, that we know it is, like holiday time, school time, all these different exam time, all those different times, that to actually pre-prepare in a couple of weeks before and just make sure that you are as nourished as possible, and you're doing those tiny stress hacks to make your system feel like it can handle it, so that you do actually feel like you have more resilience when that stress arises.
What do you think is the best way to support like a friend, loved one, partner who's super stressed out?
One thing I think is listening. I think we have a huge, I mean, there's one side. Also, I do think it does depend on men and women, because I think that there's this wonderful thing, and it's obviously a generalization, but it's something I see a lot, is that when a woman's stressed, she really wants actually someone to listen and just kind of allow herself that space to just emotionally vent. And a man will come in and try to fix the problem immediately. And it kind of creates even more stress by that sort of disconnect of being like, oh, I just wanted you to listen and vent, and then vice versa. So I think partly it's really interesting to just allow the person's space to just listen to whatever the problem is and say that you're there to support them. And if they ask then for you to help to create a solution, then of course that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. But I think a lot of the time we don't give our loved ones just the space to just be seen and heard in our emotional discomfort. And when we are stressed and anxious, it's really important to allow someone that space to just know that they can be vulnerable with their emotions, they can be vulnerable with their stress, their anxiety, and just share. And you might not have the complete solution to give them, but that might not be what they're wanting. They might just be wanting a safe space. So I think on that side, I mean, Mo will probably have a more logical way to sort of deal with it for sure. But I think on my side, I always do think it's so important to understand when someone's stressed or anxious, if they're looking for a solution from you, or if they're just looking for a space to be able to be seen and heard and just have a kind place to process their emotions, like you would want to for a friend.
I think that applies both to the masculine and feminine. It's just applied differently. Like the masculine will tend to not want to share and speak. Most. By the way, masculine and feminine is in every one of us, right? It's not a biological marker basically, but every one of us has an approach in which they sort of interact with life. A typical masculine in a relationship will sort of shut down and analyze and reflect and write down solutions and maybe take action. So the masculine in general is about doing. The typical feminine is about being and sharing and and connecting, if you want. And I think the word space applies to both of them, believe it or not. So if you're the type that requires space to reflect and just find your actions and solutions and start solving the problems before you talk about them, then that space is needed and warranted. If you're the kind that needs to share and discuss your feelings and how you're and be heard, basically, then the space to get that is what's needed. And I think both ways, what really matters is when we're stressed, everything seems to be a problem, when in reality, the presence of a loved one is actually a gift. And so when you're stressed, so it's not a secret. I share some of those things openly. When I was stressed last week, my wife Hannah, which has actually just moved to Dubai, was also stressed by her move. But my stressors were so overtaking my mind, and they felt so urgent and so sort of more severe in my mind when for her to arrive to a foreign place and try to find her place and settle, and each and every one of us felt stressed, but at the same time each and every one of us, each of us wanted to sort of contribute to resolving or relieving the issue of the other, when in reality all we just needed is to just say, hey, I recognize how difficult this is for you. I recognize you may have a different method to deal with it, okay, and I am here to fit within that method, okay, which goes back to my view on relationships in general, okay. I think love is the only answer. It's the only way you can deal with the stress of another. You can't take them out of stress. If you try to tell them what to do, you'll stress them more. You simply want to say, I can offer my love and empathy and compassion, and I'm here. Just let me in whenever you want, and I'll be there for what you need, not what I want to offer. Right? And I think this applies to even the deepest of challenges. My mom's in the hospital. My mom is a very strong woman, always independent. That feeling of her being in that place is very difficult for her. So when we have those conversations, I can't tell her anything to change that. I can just tell her, I love you. I love you as you are. I really still think you're the strongest, woman I know. And I really think you can go and pull through this. And I'm here to help the way you want me to help. Okay. And it's that ability to be there for them, to care about them, but to go at their pace and their way. I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned in relationships over the years is to ask, like, do they want do they want my advice? Do they want me to listen? Or do they want like a hug or of some sort, right? Because I've definitely been the person who in the past has tried to fix things, or and we all know like telling a woman to calm down when she's stressed never goes well, right? So but I learned that early on. So I'm but it's interesting. We've spent a lot of the conversation talking about like how our thoughts can contribute to stress and how to really like master the mind. And we talked at the beginning that a lot of doctor visits now, from a physical side, from a physical health standpoint, are stress related. And I've heard over the years that stress is the silent killer, right? That nobody pays attention to. How does stress impact the body and the physical health? Like, why are so many doctor visits related to stress?
So yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the time we get physically stressed. Our body gets stressed, but also we can create physical stress from our emotional repression, essentially. What we don't suppress with our emotions will express in the body is one of the age-old sayings, and I truly believe that. But in terms of the physical side, essentially, with our fight or flight response, when it goes on and it comes off and we go back into rest and digest, that's the only time our body in rest and digest out of stressful state can restore itself, can replenish itself, and can do things like digest our food normally, for example, because when our fight or flight goes on, we send resources we think we need away from what we need to thrive just to what we need to survive. And so our body's, logic will be, okay, well, if I'm about to become a steak myself, why do I need to digest a steak? Because that would be what fight or flight was in the olden days. It was like literally life or death, get you out of the way of a threat. And then once it's over, comes back down to rest and digest. Whereas today we sit simmering in what we call chronic stress, which is when our stress response has been simmering in the background without us realizing, just constantly flooding us with a little bit of cortisol here and there, building up, building up, building up. And we spend very little time in true restoration and true rest and digest, parasympathetic state. And so when we're in that chronically stressed state, we have an increase in inflammation hugely in the body because cortisol long term creates excess inflammation in the body, the stress hormone cortisol. And so when we are, inflamed, we know that we become a breeding ground for disease and illness. And we also then have the reality of physical stress symptoms that are constantly going on without us relating them to stress. So it's things like they can be very minimal, like the tension headache you get all the time, or the stiff neck, the horrible shoulders ache, the backache, to moving to things like digestive issues like IBS, constipation, stomach ulcers, to then moving to things like higher cholesterol and increased heart rate and blood pressure, to actually chronic things like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, even stress. Now studies show that stress can increase our risk of cancer, because long-term stress actually switches on cancer genes being expressed. And so all these things add up in terms of our physical stress, as well as not being able to sleep is a huge part of physical stress, having a lower libido, having skin issues like hives or inflammatory things like eczema. All these different things can be related to stress. And so when we look at, like you talked about, that doctor's visits are related to stress, that stat is true. But a lot of the time we tell ourselves that it's nothing to do with that. And we'll go and see the doctor and we'll take the pill to stop the physical symptom, but we won't have actually looked at what was causing that potentially to begin with, whether it's high levels of stress, whether it's emotional stress, whether it's our lifestyle. And so, yeah, that physical side of stress, I always think that it's really important for people to think, okay, if I have had a physical symptom for long enough, because the body is far wiser than your mind. The mind can tell us lies and make up stories and cause us stress, but when your body's speaking, it's telling you something for a reason. It's trying to alert you to something with an ache, a pain, a distress. And so it's really time to start paying attention before you get to burnout, before you actually end up in hospital. And so looking at, okay, if you have something that's on that list and the list continues, you think, okay, well, I've had digestive issues for ages, whether it's IBS, whatever it is. What's actually going on in my life at the moment? Have I been stressed without realizing for a long time? And if so, then what can I do to start to manage that? What can I do to change that and to support my body to be less stressed and to bring the cortisol levels down in my body? Like we talked about before, eating an anti-inflammatory diet is such a huge, huge win when your body is under stress, because all your body is trying to do is get rid of the excess cortisol that's in it, and it can't, because you're pumping it with even more cortisol. And when you're adding to it with things like excess sugar and alcohol, which again increase the stress in your body, or just being dehydrated, for example, we know that if we are dehydrated, our stress response goes off, because your body's like, oh, survival, this isn't good, it's a threat. So just looking at how you can support your body to decrease the inflammation and decrease the cortisol in it, but then really looking at, if you have had a symptom, asking yourself, is it because this could actually be to do with stress as well? Not because I've just decided that I'm getting old, so I must have a backache, and that's got nothing to do with that. Or, looking at whatever it is, the sleep problem, telling yourself you've become a bad sleeper. Well, why have you become a bad sleeper? What have you been thinking about at night? What's been stressful that's been going on in your life? So, yeah, I think it's really important to remember that mind-body connection and just how much our stress affects our physical health. And like Mo said, he looks at his physical stress as his primary. We have something we call the Unstressable quiz. And so on our website, people can go and they can see which part of themselves they're most stressed in. So mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and an overall stress score. And Mo's highest is always his physical, but he has to manage mine's my mental. And so you always have that primary. And when your physical is your primary, it's really, really important to just do things to support your body in the smallest ways. And as Mo will attest to, those tiny changes make a huge, huge difference. And yeah, reminding yourself that it could be to do with stress, your physical symptom, that we're not all superhuman. Our body does show us what we've been pushing away for a while.
I think an understanding of the machine actually on the word superhuman is really a very big reason why we get physically stressed, because stress, the biological machine of stress, is actually about making you superhuman, right? It is about reconfiguring the machine so that you can run away from a tiger or pounce on it and attack it, right? That level of reconfiguration is good for a very short, instantaneous response, but if it lingers, your liver functions are not working well, your kidney functions are not working well, your digestive system is not getting enough blood, because you're constantly in fight or flight mode, right? And the more you allow yourself to be in that state, the more your body's balance goes. Your body is really exhausted from that very unusual configuration you're putting it in. It's almost as if you have a sports car and you're driving it at 9,000 RPM. Yes, it can perform at 9,000 RPM for a bit, but if you drive it at 9,000 RPM for a trip between San Francisco and New York, the engine will overheat and melt down. That's basically what you're doing, and I think this is why stress, noticing how the biological system, the physical symptoms of stress show up in your body is probably the biggest indicator. That it's that dial on the dashboard that's telling you you're overheating.
And I think a lot of times what happens is we, like in hearing what both of you just said, we wait until it's too late to do something. We wait for the heart attack. We wait for the high blood pressure. We wait for whatever the example is. And I think the reason that can happen is because if we're chronically stressed, we become like emotionally detached and just numb because we're just so shut down. So is there anything you both would recommend as we're kind of bringing this all to a close when somebody, for somebody to be able to realize that they are just completely overstressed? But there's no symptoms. There's no back pain. There's no high blood pressure that they know of. Like, how can somebody start to recognize like these subtle early signs before it's too late?
My recommendation is always very straightforward. When you get a sore throat, you stop and you tell yourself that doesn't feel right, doesn't feel normal, right? Because we're so sometimes aware of our physical health, if you want. I'd say do the same with stress. It's very straightforward. Huh? Like Alice was saying, when we ask people, they always say, my calmest time was when was at the end of a holiday. Take stock of that. Okay. And if you don't have a holiday coming up next Sunday, wake up in the morning, switch your phone off until 5 p.m. or 3 p.m. Sit with people that you love, be in nature, drink healthy drinks, don't overdo caffeine, don't dehydrate yourself, eat healthy food, enjoy a calm, quiet connection with someone that you love. And at the end of Sunday, take stock and tell yourself, this is my state when I'm not very stressed. And then any deviations from that need your intervention. Just like you intervene when you have a sore throat. Okay? Just because you know for a fact that a sore throat is not your optimal mode of performance or survival in the world, you take action about it. When you deviate from that normal end of Sunday, calm, wonderful day in nature, yeah, take action, engage.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think it's really important to, like you say, when you think, okay, if I don't notice any physical symptoms in myself, with mental and emotional stress, there are things that are very obvious when you're stressed. And the first point of mental is your mental stress will show up as you're constantly in your head ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, and you find it hard to focus and just be fully present. And you'll find it hard to fall asleep because your thoughts might be racing, or you're waking up in the middle of the night with racing thoughts. And then the emotional side, when you say like people are disconnected, the other side to that then to look at is your behavioral change. So when we're emotionally stressed, if we suppress our emotions and we don't feel stressed or anxious or overwhelmed or irritated or low in mood, all those common signatures of emotions of stress, your behavior will change. So you'll have behavioral symptoms instead. So it's things that, okay, am I having to constantly distract myself by overworking or over socializing, or changing how my eating habits? Do I overeat to numb my emotions without realizing? Have I lost my appetite? So have you had any appetite changes? Have your sleep patterns changed? Have you been able to, has your memory changed as well? When we are stressed, we find that our memory changes, and we long-term stress actually decreases our memory function. So, are you forgetting things? Are you forgetting certain tasks? Walking into a room, not remembering why you were there? Is your libido lower? Has all these different behavioral changes? Are you snapping more easily at loved ones without realizing, just thinking it's normal? And equally, are you numbing yourself? So binge watching Netflix, like I said, or going out to distract yourself, or reaching for a glass of alcohol as your first point of just finding some form of mild relief and calm in the day. All of those things are really common signs of feeling stressed. We don't notice them because they become such a normal part of our lives. So I think if you don't feel stressed, look at your behavior and see if any of those things are on your day-to-day list.
Love it. Well, this conversation has been amazing. I wanted to thank you both for your time. I know it's a busy week for you both with the book coming out in the UK tomorrow, and congrats on that. If people want to purchase a copy of the book, if they want to follow each of you and everything else that you have to offer, where's the best place to do that?
So the book is everywhere. Luckily, all of your online retailers and most of the big store retailers, Unstressable. If you want to follow us, I'm Mo_Gawdat on Instagram. Alice, you are now Alice Law. No, Alice Law
Alice Law
dash dot.
dash Alice Law dash on Instagram. We also have an Unstressable Instagram, which is unstressable.official as well. And you can find then all the work we do with our book is on unstressable.com, because that's where we sort of created our community to help support people, the modalities we have from the book.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. This is such an important conversation because, as we all know, everybody's got something going on. So many people are stressed out right now. And I think the audience is going to get a ton of value from this conversation.
Thank you for having us. It's very, very kind. And we really love the conversation.
Thank you so much.
You got it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.